At first, I thought it was just me. The first time I've been out of work in 16 years. But after 3 weeks of buying the family groceries, I start to remember the depression stories about families getting sucked under. And it wasn't much better when I get home. The 6 o'clock news. Pictures of El Salvador that looked like Vietnam. Poland. Everything I saw, everything I heard was getting me down. But when I saw the faces at the Union Hall and at back-to-school night, then I saw it wasn't just me.
Right, it's all of us. And you know, we're all worrying about the same things. But we've started talking. We're trying to figure out how we got here. Asking questions like, who's picking up the tab for the economic recovery program? And why the big military buildup?
I stay up at night worrying about if there's going to be any job tomorrow, if I'll be able to afford groceries.
I'm in the retirement stage now, but I can't afford to retire. When you're working towards a fixed income and you have a family to support, it's pretty rough out there.
The military budget seems to be getting out of hand. No wonder our economy is in such a mess. All that spending for weapons doesn't make me feel more secure.
I'm not sure if Reagan has the answer or not. It's really a very scary time.
To understand the State of the Union, we must look not
Reagan said he was going to slash $35 billion from our social programs in 1 year. He said it would help get government off our backs. He said government was the problem, not the solution. And he said we should bring the government closer to the people. Let the states handle welfare and job training and the environment and all those programs while he's cutting back on funds.
He's going to lay his whole trip on the states. And the states are going to have to increase taxes or let the poor starve, one or the other.
Government's strategy is to cut social programs, give tax breaks so business can expand to make new jobs, and meanwhile build an arsenal which will make America safe in a dangerous world.
Lots of us bought the package. Who doesn't want this country to be strong and prosperous? Heck, a lot of us are veterans. But now I can't buy a job. And with all those factories and shops closing, and the lines at the unemployment office getting longer, it's clear now who's picking up the tab for getting government off our backs. Average workers like me. Because of new restrictions on eligibility, only 40% of the people without jobs qualify for benefits. And my payments have been cut from 65 to 39 weeks. Unemployment of young people in our cities is especially high. And minority teenagers, 4 out of every 10 don't have jobs. When we count the part-time and seasonal workers, mostly women and minorities, and the people who have quit looking for work because they've lost hope, the figures are a lot higher than the government says they are.
Now we have the highest percentage of unemployment since before World War II. That high rate of unemployment isn't an accident. It's part of a deliberate effort to reduce inflation by forcing labor to work for less money, by weakening the bargaining power our unions won over a period of 40 years. Programs to train unskilled workers and retrain others are being abandoned. And so are the public service jobs those programs created.
He's got this trickling theory, whereas he gives big business a big tax cut, and he figures that the business itself is going to train the people to take over these slots. It just ain't so.
Do you know what getting government off our backs adds up to? Cutting funds for health and safety, less inspections, more accidents and deaths, fewer restrictions to control dumping toxic waste, polluting our air and our water.
Know what else our government is neglecting? Our public schools. Especially aid for handicapped kids, and it's cutting back on federal loans to help students pay tuition.
When my eldest daughter went to college, student loans were 7%. Now that my younger daughter is going into school, the interest rate on these loans have gone up to 14%. I don't know if the younger one can make it.
Now, these cuts are only the beginning for poor people, sick, the old folks, women, children, minorities. Cutting social programs means cutting housing subsidies for people who can't afford to pay more rent. More than 2 million people are losing their food stamps, and another 21 million are getting less. And the kids will pay for it. When the government cuts back on money for school lunches, that means some kids are losing their only hot meal.
And the poor are paying too. Many of them children. 200,000 who live below the poverty line and receive Medicaid will now be dropped from the rolls. 2 out of every 3 poor adults in this country are women, and many of us have families to feed. We're often forced to settle for the least rewarding jobs. And in times like these, we are usually the first to go. Cuts in daycare and other programs make it doubly hard for us to keep working. When you check the facts, you find that the administration doesn't tell the whole truth about those social programs. They do cost money, but they reduced infant deaths in the last 10 years by 1/3. They cut diseases caused by poverty and malnutrition by 1/2. And between 1959 and 1970, those programs got almost half the people living under the poverty line above the line. The legal services and agencies which fought for equal treatment and helped protect the poor, minorities, and women from discrimination on the job, in housing, and other areas are now being cut back or dismantled altogether. The Voting Rights Bill and other civil rights, won after years of sacrifice and struggle, are being weakened. Federal programs which once attacked rural poverty are now being cut back and shifted to the states, many of which have been unable or unwilling to fund them in the past.
Based on last year's estimate, the government is cutting $35 billion worth of these programs and others this year alone. And next year, more than $30 billion. $44 billion more in '84, $43 billion in '85, $42 billion in '86. Whose budget is it anyway? It seems to me we got to ask ourselves what this country is all about. Is the business of America business? Even Wall Street is nervous about Reaganomics. We're told government's job is to stimulate savings and encourage business to invest and expand. And the way to do it is tax cuts for the wealthy, tax breaks for the corporations, windfall profits for giant oil companies, and subsidies for the tobacco growers. All you have to do is look at the figures. If my family had a household income of $100,000, the tax cuts would save us more than $3,000. Our income is $10,000 with me not working. That means at most a $60 tax break. But with 4 to feed and a mortgage to pay, the $924 we could lose in food stamps would really hurt.
Many multinational companies, which are paying record salaries to their executives, invest their wealth in foreign markets, like Europe, or countries where labor is cheap, safety regulations minimal, and unions are weak or outlawed. But where risk capital is needed for developing new sources of energy, better mass transit, or new forms of affordable housing, the corporations hold back. The government could enlist their talents and investment. Instead, government is underwriting the fastest growing industry in the United States today, the buildup of arms, fleets of submarines, and a quick strike force.
You have to ask why. Why this sacrifice of people programs while we build a war machine? One of the president's security advisors says that we're living in a pre-war and not a post-war world. That's an opinion of a lot of people in government. If that's so, our policy is to prepare to fight World War III. The arms buildup, which started years ago, is getting worse and worse. The Pentagon plans to spend more than $1.5 trillion over the next 5 years. We know that there are two price tags on weapons production. The first price tag is the one the Pentagon tells Congress. The second is the actual final bill. According to the Pentagon's own figures, the average weapon system now doubles in cost in the time it takes to move from the drawing board to the field. In 1 year, the cost estimates for 47 weapon systems jumped $50 billion. Rockwell International's B-1 bomber, described by senators as obsolete 10 years ago, has already risen from $140 million to as much as $400 million per bomber since President Reagan's decision to resume the program. McDonnell Douglas's F-18 fighter plane, which was sold to Congress at $6 million each, now costs $30 million. The arms buildup is obviously good for some corporations.
But it sure is terrible for the rest of us. $1 billion spent on the military sector creates far fewer jobs than any other use of the money. And the jobs it does create don't help those areas of the country and the industries hardest hit. While research could help solve a lot of our economic and social problems, almost 2/3 of all our federal research money is going to the military. While energy bills are killing us, the Pentagon continues to consume more petroleum than all but 7 nations in the world. Weapons production fuels inflation by pumping money into parts of our economy which are already overloaded and eating up scarce resources. To pay for these extravagances, it is estimated that each taxpayer will send the Pentagon over $10,000 between 1982 and 1986. Each family over $20,000. A city like Philadelphia will send almost 4 times more money to the Pentagon than it will have to run its entire municipal budget for those years.
Are we really so threatened that we have to set our priorities as if war was just around the corner? The government plans to spend hundreds of billions of dollars to build a whole new generation of nuclear weapons. The technology of these weapons shows a scary change in military planning. The policy of deterring nuclear attack is giving way to a strategy for fighting a nuclear war. Can you imagine fighting a nuclear war? There's no protection for me, my family, or anybody else.
I don't like the idea that someone can push a button and end my life just like that. But sometimes I wake up at night and wonder whether we're really going to make it through another 10 years.
Many of our allies are becoming more afraid because of our new strategy for fighting a nuclear war.
Even our NATO allies are reluctant to deploy our nuclear weapons, such as this Pershing missile. And they continue to expand trade and cultural relations with the Soviet Union. Our potential friends in the emerging nations know that aid and development assistance best answer their need to become more self-sufficient. They refuse to accept the idea that every single global problem can be traced to the Soviets. Yet, in 1982, we cut our economic assistance by 26% to these nations, while military aid increased by 29%.
I have a child, and I'm very afraid, you know, of the future, and arms. a terrible waste of money on arms. And I think that there are so many hungry people in underdeveloped countries that really need help. And so do a lot of people in this country.
The hundreds of thousands marching in the streets of Europe in anti-nuclear demonstrations don't think we are creating a less dangerous world. They know that a balance of nuclear terror was reached a long time ago, and that the United States and the Soviet Union can wipe out life on Earth. They don't want to be the nuclear battleground of the future, and they want nuclear weapons out of Europe.
If we don't start making some real moves towards arms control soon, a lot more nations will get the bomb, increasing the danger that someday the bomb will be used. Should we take that next terrifying step in the arms race, like the planners of nuclear war advocate? Or should we recognize that the Soviet Union and the United States are about equal in nuclear weapons and start to work for mutual arms reductions? One proposal for arms control calls for both sides to freeze all testing, production, and deployment of all nuclear weapons as a first step. President Reagan claims that the Soviet Union lies and cheats, and you just can't believe them. But did you know that we've signed 14 arms control agreements with them since the end of World War II when we were allies? And according to our State Department, they've kept every one of them, and their compliance has been good. Our former ambassador to the Soviet Union, George Kennan, says, "I find the view of the Soviet Union that prevails today in large portions of our government so extreme, so subjective, so removed from what any scrutiny would reveal, that it is not only ineffective but dangerous as a guide to political action."
500,000 of our soldiers are already stationed overseas. The bulk of the military spending is being used to build up our armed forces abroad. The rapid deployment force established by President Carter is being expanded because of Pentagon concern over U.S. access to Middle East oil fields. Our Navy is expanding rapidly and is being deployed to control the world's sea lanes. Secretary of State Haig says, "Our objective remains a world hospitable to our society and our ideals." Yet we continue to provide military support to dozens of countries which Amnesty International rank among the worst violators of human rights.
A lot of us fought in Vietnam, and it was a nightmare. Well, we don't want our kids drafted, and we don't want our kids sent to fight in places like El Salvador or Guatemala, where the governments massacre thousands of innocent people simply because they want a better life.
Many of us here are demanding a better life, too. We are seeing too many of the gains we have made in our communities wiped away. Isn't it more important to supply our kids with hot lunches than executives with 3 martini write-offs? More vital to heat our homes than bomber hangars? Saner to convert the resources being used for arms to programs designed to affirm life rather than destroy it, as the Methodist General Conference counsels? Wiser, as Pope John Paul II said, to promise our fellow human beings that we will work untiringly for disarmament and the banishing of all nuclear weapons. Citizens are demanding an end to United States support for government repression in El Salvador and opposing cuts in rent subsidies for low-income families. New coalitions are forming to fight the elimination of federal programs and are organizing around the shift of responsibility to the states and local governments. Women are struggling to bring about a society in which all have food, shelter, and clothing, and each of us is free to fulfill our potential. More and more people are speaking up, like the draft counselor who says, "We need more civilian jobs at home, not military jobs abroad," and the daycare worker who won't accept hunger as the price for the Economic Recovery Program. Environmentalists say destroying the earth is no way to protect our national security. Doctors tell us that nuclear war will be the final epidemic. And the AFL-CIO declared we cannot solve our defense problems by throwing money at them. So whose budget is it anyway? It's ours, and neighborhood groups are getting together everywhere. In Boston, voters overwhelmingly passed a citywide referendum calling for increased federal spending for social programs by reducing the tax dollars spent on nuclear weapons and foreign military intervention. So Boston agrees with the people in Detroit, in Oakland, in San Francisco, and other cities who have passed similar referenda. Working together, we can demand that the money in our budget be used to fund our needs rather than the military buildup that is threatening us all.